Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage Liz Jackson.
Hello. Hello. Have I got a tweet for you? Let's see. It's it. This is the tweet. So this tweet was written by Lego a couple of months ago, and they said, "We're super excited to introduce Lego Braille Bricks, a new product from the Lego Foundation that will help blind and visually impaired children learn Braille in a playful and inclusive way." So below this tweet was a video, and we're actually going to play that video for you now. So as you're watching this video, I want you to ask yourself, how does this make you feel? Do you feel inspired? Do you feel empathy? Is your faith restored in humanity? Do I have any blind friends in the audience? Nope, never do. Well, if I had a blind friend, they would probably tell you that this ad pissed them off, that they felt exploited. Why? How could they know it's in it, right? It's purely visual. The only audio is the background sound. And the thing is I'm actually not here today to talk about Lego. I just need for all of us to be asking ourselves who things are for. And how do our feelings obfuscate that? Because what I'm actually here to talk about today is something else. Eugenics. Not Lego at all. So governments pass assisted suicide laws citing unrelievable pain. But that's actually not why most victims seek it. And I call them victims because they cite a loss of dignity. They feel that their life has become less dignified, and so they want to die. This is eugenics. When Core77 reached out asking me to speak at a conference on futures, I first balked because I wanted more money, but ultimately I relented because there was something I wanted to talk about. So no, clearly not here to talk about negotiation. I am here to tell one specific story about eugenics. This is Hugh Hare. Hugh runs the biomechatronics group at MIT Media Lab. Sure, he's an amputee, but he's also a certain, hi John, type of designer. Where's the third one? Hold on. There he is, Tim Brown, everybody. He is a certain type of powerful man, right? And they like to sit in a certain type of way. As soon as I saw this aesthetic, I was like, who does this? But anyway, so each of these three men have actually made decisions that have been harmful in the disability community, and I spend a lot of time holding them accountable. Fortunately for John today, I'm not here to talk about him. I am here to talk about Hugh. Back in March, I was shocked when Pioneer Works gave Hugh Hare a platform to discuss his work, or as he calls it, eradicating disability. I am a Yankees fan, so I've long thought, right, Boston can have him. They can have Hugh Hare, and they can have their deflated footballs. But I was pissed when I found out that his ideas were suddenly welcome in New York. And so I did what I do. I hopped on Twitter, and I yelled at Pioneer Works. And I said, I implore Pioneer Works to ask Hugh Hare how he aims to eradicate disability without eugenics. Ask him to provide one example throughout all of history. They didn't respond, I assume, because there isn't actually an example for them to provide, but in that time, I actually got this talk scheduled, and I felt appeased because I knew that this was going to be my chance to talk about what Hugh was doing at Pioneer Works, maybe actually reach some people that Hugh had reached and propose an alternative. But then May rolled around, and all of a sudden, it was this one particular day, a bunch of my friends and mentors started emailing me, letting me know that MIT Media Lab had opened up their nominations for the MIT Disobedient Award. And I was thinking about it, and I realized, oh my God, like, I'm disobedient. This is my chance. And so I asked all my friends, all my mentors, total fucking strangers, to nominate me to rename the MIT Media Lab to the MIT Eugenics Lab. I'm the only person who's ever been kicked out of the TED residency, so I knew that I wasn't going to actually get this. But on the rare chance that I got the $250,000 award, I knew that I wanted to use that money to build out a disability studies program within the lab to curb what I saw as Hugh Hare's eugenics crusade. So, right, I'm feeling pretty good. I've got this talk lined up. I've got some really good friends, and I have a really good idea. But then this headline popped up in my Twitter feed in July. Jeffrey Epstein hoped to seed the human race with his DNA. I mean, the story is just absolutely bonkers. Like, he really did want to use his sperm to reseed the human race. I click on the article, and I'm reading through it, and you should have seen the look on my face when I saw the New York Times actually link transhumanism to eugenics. This just seemed really aware in a way that disabled scholars aren't used to in the mainstream media. And so I'm sitting there and I'm reading this article, right? And I have no reason to link MIT Media Lab to Epstein. But for some reason, I was just thinking about the word transhumanism, and I've realized I'd never searched the word. And so I went and clicked over to the MIT Media Lab website, and I typed in the word transhumanism, and this absolutely cringeworthy stream of thought op-ed by Joy Ito came up about transhumanism. If you get the chance, I suggest you read it. Like, The Onion couldn't possibly do it justice. But you have to realize, like, I actually didn't know who Joy was. All I knew was that his writing made me feel really embarrassed, both for myself and for him, and that I hated Hugh Hare. Like, that's all I knew. But I was still curious, right? And so after I had Googled transhumanism, I decided, okay, I'm gonna Google disability. And some of Hugh's stuff came up on eradicating disability. There was a TED Talk, among other things. But then this headline came up. And you can't really see it very easily, but it says, "Disability Simulating VR Promotes Empathy." And I hung my head. And this glory that I was feeling of feeling like I had really caught on to something, it stopped feeling good. Because this was the moment that I realized that MIT Media Lab wasn't using actual science, right? They're saying disability simulations promote empathy, but this is actual science. Disability simulations promote distress, right? And this is the thing that I think about is MIT Media Lab has so many resources. Disability studies, we have to go by the book. We have so little resources. If we were to fudge any sort of science, it would ruin us, right? And so I'm left wondering, how was this allowed to happen? But the thing is our checks and balances, they exist in the medical world, not in tech and design. But disruptions in tech and design have begun to erode the protections that we have fought so hard for in medicine. And so for me, this begs the question that Aviad E. Reyes is asking, which is whether our perception of eugenics is undergoing a tremendous shift from its previous dystopian labeling to a utopian view, from a tragic nightmare to an inspiring dream. A few weeks ago, I was at the airport when this MIT Tech Review cover caught my eye. I flipped it open, and on the right is the first page that I landed on. MIT actually published a piece arguing that life over the age of 75 is not worth living. We are so caught up in Epstein, the person, that we're failing to ask ourselves what that money was intended for. Eugenics is upon us, and while it was happening in earth-shattering ways at MIT Media Lab, we also need to acknowledge how we, as designers and technologists, are participating in this process every single day. The world has taught us that a disabled body is nothing more than a body in need of intervention. And this is exactly what designers do. We design interventions. We dedicate our careers to it. We are here today because of our commitment to this process. We are seekers who develop our skills with rigor because we oftentimes want to be the best. There is a certain glory in being a designer. And so, of course, I see the natural progression. Of course, we're going to want to take our highly attuned skills and apply them to something that we think needs fixing. But I am someone who straddles both sides. I am a disabled designer. And while solutions are fulfilling to me as a designer, this process has begun to feel destructive to me as a disabled person. I blame design schools, which have become what I call breeding grounds for pathological altruism. So what is a pathological altruist? It is a person whose well-meaning efforts worsen the very situation they had intended to help. Someone who stays in an abusive marriage for the kids is a pathological altruist. Animal hoarders are pathological altruists. Someone who might actually kill you with kindness is a pathological altruist. These students here are pathological altruists, right? They made a stair climbing wheelchair. And look how much Mashable loved it. And then look how much the disability community hated it, right? They say, such a shame they didn't begin by gaining an understanding of what many wheelchair users actually want. Ramps, curbs, a chance to self-propel in an accessible environment to stay fit, to be listened to. It blew my mind, and not in a good way. This would steal my independence. I call projects like these disability dongles. So what is a disability dongle? A disability dongle is a well-intended and elegant yet useless solution to a problem we never knew we always had. Disability dongles are most frequently created in design schools and at Hello IDEO. So I tell this story a lot, and I've sort of gotten bored of it, but then yesterday I realized that it's actually been making the rounds inside of IDEO, so I'm just going to tell it with even more gusto until they do something about it. So God, what was this? It was 2 years ago, I was invited to IDEO. They said they wanted to show me a technology they had created. They said, we have created this technology that is intended to get disabled people hired. And so I said to them, what disabled people did you hire to create this technology that's intended to get disabled people hired? And they were like, none. And then they showed me the door. So I was so angry from that experience that I created a new methodology that I call design questioning, which is my response to design thinking, which, as you know, is an approach to design that has really started gaining steam in the 1960s. It was created, in essence, by powerful white men who had no equals, right? These are men who were at the top of their professions. So they were aligned with the greatest institutions in the world, and they were creating products that filled the homes of millions of people all over the world. And they started realizing that design wasn't reaching everyone, and so they created a system built on empathy to fill in these gaps. And while much good has come of design thinking, it has inadvertently fueled the narrative that disabled people are recipients rather than drivers of design. This is why I propose design questioning, which looks at design thinking from the user's perspective, because I believe when we're finally able to question the systems that disable us, everybody involved stops seeing our bodies as the problem. So how do you do design questioning? Well, you look at it through the user's perspective. So let's start with step one. Step one of design thinking is cultivating empathy through observations and interviews. But to a disabled person, it can feel a little bit less like empathy and a little bit more like designers are gleaning our ideas and our life hacks, and they're selling them back to us as inspirational do-good. It makes me think of the story of OXO kitchen products, which I assume everybody here knows, right? Products, gummy tactile handle. So I'm highly aware that OXO is the universal example of universal design. You go on the website and you read Sam Farber saw that his wife, Betsy, had arthritis, was having a hard time peeling a carrot, so he decided to make a better peeler for her to use. So I have a mentor, his name is Tucker Veermeister. I lovingly refer to him as the world's most industrial designer. And he sits across from me in the office. And I just happened to ask him one day, I said, Tucker, can you tell me about Betsy? And Tucker said to me, oh, did you know she was a designer? And I said, no, I did not know she was a designer. He said, yeah, she was around all the time. And I started thinking about it, and I realized I don't know a single designer that would just let her husband inspirationally make her a peeler. So I pick up the phone and I call Betsy, and the first thing she says to me is I'm going to go down in history as being Sam's lowly crippled wife when it was actually my idea in the first place. So that's step one. Step two is defining the problem, but because disabled people are unable to lead these processes, it is us that's defined as the problem rather than the problem being defined as the problem. So you have our insights gleaned, we're defined as the problem, and then designers enter this iterative process of ideation, prototyping, and testing, which I argue leads to the unacknowledged sixth step of design thinking, or as I call it, design thanking, because we're expected to be grateful for that which has been done for us. So this is the thing that I've been sort of spewing about for about a year or so. And back in May, I happened to be at 99U, and Tim Brown, right, he was the CEO of IDEO. He spent the last 30 years of his life popularizing design thinking. He was on stage, and I for an interview, and it struck me as really interesting that he was being interviewed and did not once say the word design thinking until the interviewer specifically asked him about it. And this is what he said. He said, so unless we popularize design methods, oh wait, hold on, look at this picture of him. Look how he's sitting. So that's how he was sitting when he said this. So unless we popularize design methods and design approaches, and we use the convenient term design thinking, even though I think it has lots of downsides, right? So he thinks the term has lots of downsides. I was like, you turd. Right? What about the methodology? But then I got curious, and I realized maybe he's right. the term thinking does have a lot of downsides. We are told from the moment that we entered our first design course to be empathetic and to think of, to think of, to think of. But all the while, we're actually being taught something entirely different. Through mantras like usability, we're actually being taught to think for, as though we've become these Vitruvian godlike creatures, and that simply by entering this profession, we become the arbiters of all that is good and just. But if there's one thing in all of this that I've learned, it's actually that thinking is elitist. Think about it. No, don't think, question. Who gets access to a think tank? Sorry, New Lab. Who gets to be a thought leader? Sorry, speakers. Who gets to do design thinking, right? Sorry. And are we really doing the thinking, or are we just getting the credit? Let's ask Gary Vaynerchuk. Like, this is his product, Empathy Wines. I think it's like you go on the website and he says, I have empathy for the buyer, empathy for the seller. The wine is like $60 a pop. I'm like, not happening. I think he's lost the plot. But what the hell is empathy anyway? So a really good book that I highly recommend, this is actually how I first started learning about it. It's called You Must Change Your Life. And what I learned is the word empathy it's only been around for 100 years. It's been around since 1909. But it actually derived from a German term called Einfühlung. What happened was there was a German psychologist named Theodor Lipps. So like he was friends with Rilke and Rodin. He was Freud's mentor. And what he saw was that when people go into museums and they encounter great works of art, right, they may tug at their collar. They might put their hand on their chest and step back. They might sway. And the thing that he realized is that people were physically moved by works of great human expression. And so he developed a term, and he called it Einfühlung, and that's what it meant. It meant physically moved by works of great human expression. The term took off in Germany, made its way to the United States, and it shifted to empathy. And it wasn't just the word that shifted, it was actually the meaning. And it went from feeling physically moved by works of great human expression to feeling sympathy, or as we in the disability community experience it, feeling pity for a person's situation or circumstance. And the thing that I realize is in the same 100 years, at the same time that empathy was shifting from inspiration to pity, at the same time disability was shifting from pity to inspiration. And I think in all of this, we have lost the capacity to really parse out and glean one emotion from the other. And I think this process actually has three outcomes. The first is it reifies class and power structures. So you always have the empathizer and you always have the empathizee, and it's the empathizer that gets to tell the story, right? The second thing is it prescribes emotions. We have convinced ourselves in design that things that feel a certain way do a certain thing, but I would argue that they don't. In design, I believe that things that feel a certain way actually prevent us from doing a certain thing. And the last thing is, and this is where the disability community gets really stuck, is it silences the recipient, right? We're talking about futures today. We're asking what kind of future we want without asking who will be included in our future. So I want to leave you with this story, if it comes up. Let's see. There it is. So a year and a half ago, it was early. I was walking through New York City, and I was on my way to the office, and I encountered the most beautiful bouquet of flowers I had ever seen in my entire life. And I couldn't believe it. So the first thing I did was I stopped and I took this picture. And then I started thinking to myself, who would do this? Who would throw these flowers away? Somebody needs to save them. And I was looking at the cherry blossoms, and they just seemed too big for me to pick up. But there were tulips at the base. And so I picked up the tulips, and I took them into the office. And I'm sitting in the office, and I have the tulips, and I pull open the picture, and I'm looking at it, and I'm thinking to myself, somebody needs to save the cherry blossoms. So I march back down the 2 blocks, right? And I go, and I tug at 2, and they're 6 foot tall. I tug at 2 of the cherry blossoms, and in the process, I end up knocking the entire can over, right? And I'm looking at it, and I'm like, but it was so beautiful. I ruined it. And I have this brand new leather jacket, and I didn't care. I hugged that New York City trash can, and I made it go back upright, and it did not look the same at all. But I had a couple cherry blossoms, so I took them back to the office, and I'm sitting there, and I'm looking at the picture again. And at the bottom, I see a hashtag that was spray painted on the ground. And so I type the hashtag into Instagram, and that was the moment that I realized nobody had thrown these flowers away. This was a public art installation. So I was horrified. I started crying. I was like, who would do this? But then I decided I was going to email the artist, Lewis Miller, and I did. I wrote him and I said, I find myself completely overwhelmed, both by the misguided nature of my instinct and by the beauty of what you created. I hope this serves as a reminder to me, a disability advocate, that not all things need saving. Sometimes they need to exist. Thank you.